Purdue won a game against the undefeated number one team in the nation, and Zach Edey was the third leading scorer. Man, that is a team capable of winning a national championship.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week national college hoop show, part, of course, of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade.
What's up?
Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by PrizePicks. Folks, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use that promo code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Isaac, what an incredible weekend of college basketball yet again. We talked about this last week. It's so dang good to have Saturdays back in college basketball world. A tremendous amount of games. Some of them that felt like it felt like a long time ago. That UConn Gonzaga game feels like days and days ago as we're recording this. And for those of you who want to hear some more instant reaction from us before waiting for the Monday episode, you can join us on our Discord channel. It is free to join. There is a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Just click that link, come hang out with us, talking college basketball 24/7 there. We've been doing our undefeated watch throughout the season, and last weekend was another big, tough one for those undefeated teams. We had 7. Now we have just 4. Houston, Oklahoma, James Madison, and Ole Miss are all that is left after Arizona falls to Purdue. Baylor falls to Michigan State. Clemson falls to Memphis. And guess what, Isaac? We're going to talk about all 3
Here we are.
Those games today here on Locked On College Basketball. But we got to start with that epic matchup Saturday between the Wildcats of Arizona and the Boilermakers of Purdue. Purdue pulls off a victory, ends Arizona's winning streak 92-84, high octane offensive affair. And this was done. It's not that Zach Edey was bad. He's rarely bad, but this was done by people other than Zach Edey on that Purdue team, something that I think a lot of people really needed to see from Purdue in order to feel more confident about this team's direction going forward. And they got it. Braden Smith, 26 points. Fletcher, Loyer, 27 points. These guys combined to make 20 field goals out of 38 attempts. They went 9 of 16 from 3. They went 4 of 4 from the free throw line. And again, folks, for those of you who maybe haven't seen a lot of Arizona this year and you're thinking, oh, well, Arizona's always been a bad defensive team. They're one of the best defensive teams in the country coming into this matchup, and Purdue hangs 92 on them while doing it primarily from the backcourt. What a tremendous performance from that backcourt, and a really huge statement from Purdue that they're not just a one-man band.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at KenPom in real time right now. Arizona's still 3rd in the nation in defensive efficiency, Andy. So that tells you just how good they were already, even after this. Yeah, I mean, Andy, you hit the nail on the head. The biggest thing here is Zach Edey had a great game. 22 points, 9 boards, 5 assists. That was maybe the most impressive part of his stat line. 2 steals and a block. But yeah, what Smith and Loyer did was just absolutely what you need to see. And it's not like they were playing Arizona School, of Northern Grand Canyon, Southern Rim, or I don't know, whatever. Like, this is the number 1 team in the country. Yeah. This is an undefeated team. This is a team with experienced high-level guards, guys like Caleb Love and Pella Larson and Kylan Bozit. Like, that's who these guys did this against. So that's not only the production, but who it was against, Andy, is a big part to me of what made this so special. And that's also while Arizona's getting big contributions from guys. It's not like they had a bad day. As you said, this is just 2 high-octane offenses going at it. I do think this game being in downtown Indianapolis is a help for Purdue. Oh, by the way, meanwhile, the Colts are racking up a big win across town. And so I just think that almost, I know it sounds silly, but that weekend before Christmas kind of energy, 2 big teams playing, like that goes into this. And so, I mentioned big performances for Arizona too. You look at Caleb Love, 29 points on 9 of 19 shooting, 4 of 9 from 3, perfect from the free throw line. Kashad Johnson, we've talked about what a great asset he's been coming over from San Diego State. He had 24 on 8 of 13 shooting, perfect from 3. and 6 of 7 from the free throw line. So it's not like Coach Lloyd's team went up to Indy and got embarrassed. It's just that Purdue was that much better.
Yeah, that's what that crazy part is. We've talked about Arizona as a team that's like, one of the things that works for them really well is that they don't necessarily need Caleb Love to have great games to win. They can win without him having, like, he doesn't need to be that really good version of Caleb Love. He can even be that kind of questionable version of Caleb Love, and they can still win. And yet here we are talking about them in a game where Caleb Love was great, where he did drop, nearly hang 30 on them, and he wasn't, insanely efficient, but he was, that's a pretty good Caleb Love game right there. 30 or nearly 29 points on 19 shots is great. And they still lose. Like, that is rare to happen for Arizona. And sure, there's some questions about Arizona's bench depth. And that's been a bit of a thing all year long. But for a team that coming into this game, I love was averaging 14 and everybody else was averaging basically 12.5 points per game, almost exactly. Like, they had this really balanced starting five. And, you want a little bit more from Krivas consistently off the bench, from Bradley consistently off the bench. And in this game in particular, only 5 even field goal attempts from Arizona's bench, only 2 total points. Like, that's going to be an issue for them heading into March potentially. But it takes a team like Purdue in order to beat Arizona, and to beat Arizona when Caleb Love has that kind of game. This isn't going to happen to Arizona very often. And it's less about the Wildcats in my mind and more about Purdue being one of, if not the very best team in the country.
And Andy, we had talked about this gauntlet that Purdue kind of had with Northwestern, Iowa, Alabama, and Arizona. They lost obviously at Northwestern, true road game, but now they've knocked off Iowa. They've beaten Alabama and Arizona, and then they get a little bit of a reprieve. They just have 2 more non-con games, but it's Jacksonville and Eastern Kentucky. So no reason to expect that Purdue's not going to go into the main chunk of Big Ten play sitting at 12-1. Arizona, on the other hand, is still thick in the middle of their 4-game gauntlet because Wisconsin they beat, as you'll recall. Then this loss to Purdue. Dude, this Wednesday, Alabama. And then on Saturday, Christmas Eve, FAU. So it does not lighten up for Arizona, and they're going to continue to have to show their mettle. And I'm really, really intrigued to see how the Wildcats bounce back from this one and what they're able to do against an Alabama team that we'll talk about here a little bit later on the show, but will be coming off a loss themselves.
Yeah, and I think that the question now is what you do at the very top of the standings. I mean, Arizona was number 1. Do you bump Purdue back to number 1? Do you keep Arizona there despite a loss? Do you bump somebody like Houston, who remains undefeated? UConn could be in that conversation after a win over Gonzaga. Like, for me, Purdue has a really strong argument. You look at the loss at Northwestern and the issue there, and I think the issue that many are going to have with Purdue, and it's going to be some bias from last year's NCAA tournament still, but Purdue does look like a team more capable of losing to a subpar opponent than an Arizona or a UConn. I mean, those teams haven't done that. Arizona's only loss is to Purdue. UConn's only loss is to Kansas. Like, Houston does not have a loss. Like, Purdue has the worst loss out of that top 5 by a considerable amount. No disrespect to Northwestern, but it's true. And I think that is a fair argument to use against Purdue. But when they're at their best, I mean, look at the result that we just saw. It's hard to argue that they, when they're at their best, are not the best team in college basketball. I don't think that you can really argue that they're not, because of what they just did, because of what they've showed they're capable of doing. But they also have showed a side that some of those other teams haven't showed yet.
Yeah, I hear that, but also like that one loss. I know Northwestern 66th. I like it Ken Palm right now. It's an overtime loss. It's close, but yes, probably by definition it is the worst loss. Right. But their resume, I would say, is also the best. Where it's like they've got, I'm counting them up right now: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins against Ken Palm top 50 teams right now, and no one like Kansas. 1, 2, 3. Kansas has 3 wins against top 50 Ken Palm. And so it's like, that's the dichotomy we're living with is by definition, maybe they have the worst, but it's like, how many teams are going to lose that Friday night game at Northwestern? And then who's going to be able to have that many high level wins? I mean, that's absurd when you look at what Purdue's done. And then they're going to be able to get more of those, obviously, in Big Ten play. But good grief, dude. It's fun. And you and I were just having a conversation before the show started about, I could easily argue for UConn at the top. I could easily argue for Purdue or Arizona. And some will probably, I wouldn't be surprised if when the AP poll releases today, Monday, if Kansas is right back at the top, since they were number 2 in the AP poll. They were 5 in ours. But I personally am going to put Purdue right back at the top, just flip-flop them in Arizona. And then I'm going to have UConn 3rd. And I haven't gone beyond that, but that's where I'm sitting right now. All right, Andy, we're going to move on from that game to remind ourselves that also in the state of Indiana, there was a game played on Saturday. Last week, we talked about Indiana and Michigan State having massive opportunities in front of them on Saturday. Indiana at home against Kansas, Michigan State in Detroit against Baylor. One of these teams took advantage of it, and the other almost did. We'll get you all up to date on those in just a second. Right after we tell you that this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights and more, whether you're into speed or power or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Andy, last week on Thursday's show, we did our weekend preview, and one of the big things we talked about is kind of comparing this Indiana and Michigan State opportunities. Indiana was in a better place coming into this game than Michigan State was, but both of them had massive opportunities, one in a true road game, one in essentially a road game, Michigan State being in Detroit, both of which were against top 10 teams. Well, Andy, our conclusion was that Michigan State was the more desperate of these two, and I think that holds. And oh boy, did that desperation show through on Saturday, Andy, before we knew what hit us, because this was in the first window, if I remember correctly, back to Saturday. The score, Michigan State wins 88-64, a 24-point margin, and the end. And of course, this is exactly what happened. Baylor comes in 9-0, Michigan State 4-5, headed in opposite directions, but Michigan State winds up with their largest ever victory over an AP top 10 team. Andy, wow.
Yeah, it didn't even seem as close as the final score indicates. The final score shows 88-64, which is not a close game by any stretch, but it looked worse. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dennis scored for Baylor, and that's the only reason it wasn't a 30-point game at halftime.
Yeah, little jumper with like 2 or 3 seconds left. Yeah.
That's the only reason it wasn't a 30-point game at halftime. That is absolutely insane. As soon as this game was on, it was like, oh, this is immediately bad. It was 22-7 after 9 minutes. Like, Baylor really, really struggled to score at all in the first half. And then they played them well in the second half. They won by 4 in the second half. But how much of that is Michigan State just kind of being able to control?
Yeah.
Tyson Walker did almost all of his damage in the first half. He had 18 points. Again, Baylor had 17 in the first half as a team. Fantastic first half performance from Walker.
You're telling me at halftime the score was Tyson Walker 18, Baylor 17?
That is
what I'm hearing you say?
Precisely what the score was at halftime, yes.
Unreal.
Absolutely. Just a jaw-dropping performance from the Spartans. And it's not like we didn't think they were capable of winning this game, capable of beating Baylor, capable of beating really most of the teams in the country, especially before the season started. We obviously had incredibly high aspirations for Michigan State. They were, I think, in the top 3 to 5 basically everywhere. I think we had them 4th, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that conversation. And then obviously things went haywire for them pretty much right out of the chutes, and they've been continuing to try to climb and recover. But our guy Leaf Tulane on Wednesday's episode of Locked On College Basketball last week, we talked about all 7 of the remaining undefeated undefeated teams and kind of did a pretenders contenders. And he was a little skeptical about Baylor, in part because of their defense. He wasn't as skeptical about their offense. Obviously, scoring 17 points in a half is a clear indication that at times that offense can falter. But they gave up 45 points in the first half to Michigan State, and the defense is something I would be worried about a bit more with Scott Drew's team. I almost kind of toss out the offensive disaster in the first half, not toss it out entirely, but they're not going to have more 17-point first halves, I don't think. I think that was just an incredibly weird. They just got blitzed, surprised by something that Tom Izzo and Michigan State did, and just were really unable to find a way to recover from that. Jacoby Walter did not have a good game. Freshmen are going to struggle sometimes. It's part of the deal. There are very rare freshmen, even blue chip 5-star diaper dandies, who don't have bad nights. It happens. And Baylor going into a pseudo road environment against a good team, when you kind of get smacked in the mouth early, it's sometimes hard to recover from that. And shout out to them for having a strong second half. But this is the kind of performance where I'm not going to completely disavow Baylor or anything like that. But obviously they're going to move down in the rankings, and shout out to Michigan State for picking up a much needed momentum carrying win.
Yes, honestly. And Andy, there were several things to me that were markers of this. When you look back at the box score and take this in totality, I agree with you. The second half, it's one of those where it might as well not have even happened. But turnovers played a major role in this one. Michigan State had 15. That's more than they want. But Baylor had 21 in that. And you just can't do that. No. Ray J. Dennis and Jaden Nunn each had 6, Andy. And that's you can't do that. Michigan State had 15 steals, so that contributes to those 21 turnovers. But the kicker for me was the shooting. It's interesting when you look at the numbers. It's not that it was one of those situations where Michigan State was creating a bunch more turnovers and a bunch more shots. The shot attempts were almost identical. Michigan State had 49, Baylor 48. The difference is how many of those actually went in. Right. Baylor was a very respectable 47.9% from the field, but Michigan State shot 63%, Andy, and 66.7% from 3. So that to me is the difference. They're hitting shots, and Baylor just didn't hit as many, as you talked about with the first half. So congrats to Michigan State. Is this a turning point or a one-off? We can't say yet. We're going to have to press pause and wait on that. Based on the results of the year, I got to say it's a one-off until Coach Izzo's team proves me otherwise. Andy, why don't we pack up the bags from Indianapolis, head about 50 miles down the road to Bloomington, and check out what happened there inside Assembly Hall, where Indiana had a golden opportunity to put away Kansas, who had never won in Assembly Hall. They were up 13 with 15 minutes to go at 50-37. Then over the next 10 minutes, Bill Self's team went on a 25-11 run to take a lead. And after trading some buckets, Kansas puts it away down the stretch for their first ever win in Bloomington. Andy, I know that this Indiana team is kicking themselves the rest of the weekend at a great shot. But, man, what a win for Bill Self's club.
Yeah, a golden opportunity, not only for Indiana, but for the Big Ten to pick up a pair of wins over the Big 12 conference and kind of really establish themselves, or at least kind of send a statement in a major way between that and, of course, Purdue's win over Arizona. Certainly could have been a phenomenal day for the Big Ten, was still a good day. And I think Indiana showing this kind of fight is still something positive. I think you can take Mike Woodson's club can take a lot of positives out of this, but it's really tough to be up 13 at home, 15 minutes to go, playing a team like that, playing a player like Hunter Dickinson, who every single Indiana fan wanted to see lose. I can promise you that with absolute confidence. But as much as I want to kind of focus on that, as much as the Indiana side of it is important, like shout out to Kansas too. I mean, it was really hard to come from behind in a game like this. In an environment like this, against an opponent like this. Like, we've kind of been a little skeptical of Indiana, and I still am to an extent, but like, they're not a bad team by any stretch, and they played like a very good team in this game. This team did not have Xavier Johnson. They started a true freshman at point guard, and then Trey Galloway had to step up, and boy did he. I had 28 points from him on 12 of 17 from the field. He's only had 20 once in his career. I mean, just a monster game from Trey Galloway. And Mackenzie Mbako stepped up in a big way for Indiana. We've kind of had our hesitations on him as well. He really hasn't played all that well. in any of Indiana's big games up to this point, but he
He's
goes out.
got to. He's got to.
Yeah, he's got to. And he did in this game, 14-5, but ultimately Kansas found ways to get buckets late in the second half. They exploited the pick and roll. They were able to get some free buckets that way, shut down Indiana. I think Kevin McCullar had a monster second half, a lot of it defensively. There was like 3 or 4 times where Indiana ran the same pick and roll play that they'd been running throughout the game, and McCullar was able to step in, make an interception, get some free points out in transition. And then once they finally built the lead, they built a 2-possession lead, McCullar was able to put the game away at the free throw line, 13 of 16 from the charity stripe for
That's
McCullar.
not Kansas. That's only Kevin McCullar.
Yes, that's Kevin McCullar had 13 made free throws in this game on 16 attempts. He really has kind of stepped into that like Jalen Wilson type role for the Jayhawks, doing a little bit of everything. The guy that you rely on down the stretch. Hunter Dickinson had some fantastic performance, or had a fantastic stretch in the second half as well, cleaning up on the offensive glass. And this Jayhawks team is really good. There's still some questions about their bench, their overall depth, but it is really hard to come back from a double-digit deficit in the second half on the road in that environment. There are not a lot of teams in college basketball who can do that. Kansas is one of them. And while it's a huge bummer for Indiana, and I know they're kicking themselves for not finishing this one out, that's what really good teams do at Kansas did.
Yeah, man. Again, we were talking about our top 3, but when you mix in Houston and Kansas into that top 5, it's fun, Andy, and very interested to see how both of these teams move forward. You know, for Kansas, this is a great win. For Indiana, you can't hang your head. You can't let one loss turn into 2. You got to pick it up and keep going into Big Ten play.
Well, Isaac, it tells you something about how ridiculously loaded this weekend was that we've got 2 AP top 15 matchups that we're talking about in our weekly 6-pack. UConn's continuing to prove how legitimate they are with a win over Gonzaga. Kentucky wins a blue blood battle in Atlanta over North Carolina. We're going to get to those and the rest of our Monday 6-pack coming up right after this. All right, Isaac. UConn, Gonzaga in Seattle. I was going to call it the battle in Seattle because that's what it has historically been called, but they have changed the name of the event. It was at Climate Pledge Arena, the home of the Seattle Kraken, an incredible environment, a fun
environment.
But UConn does what UConn does in this one, jumps out to an early lead. Gonzaga never really went away. They continued to fight. They had the game within single digits at points in the second half, but it never really felt like they could truly challenge with UConn. And part of that is because UConn went absolutely nuclear in the first half, 7 of 9 from 3 in the first half as a team. That's basically 78% from 3 from deep. A great performance from Cam Spencer in the first half, but really, as much as the outside shooting was a factor for both sides, Gonzaga's continued to really struggle as a 3-point shooting team, just 2 of 12 in this one. A big storyline as well was Donovan Clingan. For folks who are waiting to see him have that game that really proves he's an NBA draft lottery capable player, this was the performance. 21 points for him, 8 rebounds, 8 of 11 from the field, three assists. He had a pair of blocks. He had a steal. He only had 1 turnover. UConn got him the ball early and often. He established himself on the block. Beyond that, his defense prevented Gonzaga's bigs from scoring. The 4 bigs for Gonzaga combined to shoot 10 of 27 in this one. Just couldn't get anything going at the rim because of his defensive pressure. Couldn't stop him offensively. Just a monster game from Clingan, and UConn continues to prove that they are ready to defend their national championship. They have not lost to anybody bad. Their only loss is at Fog Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas, and they made Kansas work for every minute of that one. And UConn looks like there's a very, very strong argument, especially as Castle gets more kind of acclimated into that offense. There's a strong argument for UConn as the best team in the country. It's hard to watch them for a full 40 minutes and not think that they're right there.
I completely agree with that assessment. Andy, the other AP top 15 matchup is North Carolina and Kentucky in Atlanta in the second game of the CBS Sports Classic. Wildcats win 87-83. They were up double digits multiple times in this game. North Carolina kept fighting back, and a great job by Kentucky, a young Kentucky team, to continue responding after responding after responding. In this game, it wasn't about Antonio Reeves going nuts or Reed Shepherd going nuts. And I think that's almost what's more impressive for Kentucky, is that they had 8 players with 7 or more points. That balanced approach, how on earth are you going to defend that kind of offense when John Calipari, as always, has NBA talent all over the court? Aaron Bradshaw moved into the starting lineup for the first time coming back from his injury. Ugana Onyenso was available for the first time, so they're starting to get healthy. They're starting to get better. Folks, watch out for this Kentucky team starting to round into form right ahead of SEC play. Rob Dillingham, leading scorer with 17 points. On the North Carolina side, RJ Davis continues to roll as one of the best guards in the nation right now. 5 straight games of 26 plus points. His free throw streak came to an end at 41 straight made free throws. Unfortunately, that streak ended right down the stretch at a critical moment for North Carolina. You hate to see that for anyone. We've been waiting on a breakout from Cormac Ryan to come alongside what RJ Davis and Armando Bacot are doing. He did that in this game, 20 points. Unfortunately, Armando Bacot didn't show up, and so that doesn't come along well. RJ Davis needs help for this team to show up. Big win for Kentucky.
Yeah, and one of the other things we're really looking forward to this weekend, outside of the tremendous top 15 matchups that we've discussed, is how Houston responds to playing the best opponent they've played all season, and that was Texas A&M. And Houston won, and Houston secured a victory over Texas A&M, and that is not the entirety of the story. If you only watch the first half of this game, you'd think, wow, Houston looks like the number 1 team in the country. They're blasting Texas A&M, jumped out to a huge lead at the under 16 media timeout in the second half. They were up 21 points. And then Texas A&M went on a massive run in the second half, tied this game with a minute and a half left. And then Houston responded, went 7-3, or outscored them 7-3 down the stretch, secured a 4-point 70-66 victory. And certainly this is kind of a litmus test for folks who are a little out on Houston. They'll say, look, they blew a 21-point lead against Texas A&M. For people who are pro-Houston, they'll point out, well, they were up by 21 points against Texas A&M. And also, when you watch your entire lead evaporate, it's really hard to mentally respond to that. And Houston did, and still won. That's a huge, huge storyline for them. I'm still in on this Houston team. I'm concerned about the Terrence Arsenault injury, as we're discussing right now. We don't have an update on what the situation is with Arsenault for them. So that's a big thing to watch for them. On the A&M side, shout out Wade Taylor. Monster game from him. Gotcha. 8 in the first half, finished with 34 in just an SEC Player of the Year type of performance in the second half from A&M, or from Taylor and A&M. And I think this is still a really, really good team. And Houston did a really good job of fighting off a furious rally from them.
One of the games that took place around supper was Alabama against number 8 Creighton in Omaha. You might remember Creighton coming off that loss at UNLV last week. So and Andy, I'm assuming you were too, very curious to see how the Blue Jays would respond. They held on in a phenomenal basketball game, 85-82, a tight game throughout. Ryan Kalkbrenner, speaking of injuries, went out in the first half with an ankle injury, but came back and was monster for the Blue Jays, scoring 19 points to go with 8 rebounds and 3 blocks, doing what he does. And those 19 points, folks, go back and watch the highlights. I mean, it's just all right at the rim. Great stuff. Andy, what was impressive to me most about Creighton's performance was that we talked about Kentucky's balanced scoring. Creighton, from their big 4, is what they got: 22 from Alexander, 20 from Shireman, 19 from Kalkbrenner, and 12 from Stephen Ashworth. And so they just continue to do this. And folks, if you didn't see it, Mark Sears got a phenomenal look just across half court at a game tying 3. Go look at my Twitter feed. I got a picture of it. This ball is almost like more than halfway down the cylinder and somehow spun out. I could not believe, I had to go back and watch it multiple times because I didn't get the physics of it. Tough loss for Nate Oates' team. But as we said, they got some more chances at resume building wins coming up.
The Battle of the Tigers next up, Clemson and
Tigers.
Memphis. Clemson, previously undefeated, they were ranked 13th in the country coming into this game, but Memphis pulls off the upset here at home, 79-77. This game was phenomenal. It was within 5 points literally the entire second half of this game. It was a blood-boiling type of performance. Memphis looks every bit the part of a top 25 team. There's no debate in my mind. I had them 25th last week. They will certainly stay in that top 25 going forward. David Jones, 22 points, 9 of 12 at the free throw line, continues to be a dominating force for Memphis, will be one of, if not the very best player in the American Athletic Conference. Another nice game from Javon Quinterly as well, 17.6 assists. I'm not super out on Clemson because of this. They've been undefeated up to this point. To lose on the road by 2 to a very good Memphis team doesn't really move the needle. I'll move them down in my rankings most likely, but I don't think that this says a ton about Clemson. It's hard to win on the road, and Memphis defended their home floor and pulled off a really big victory for them. To be doing this before they get some reinforcements with Naquan Tomlin, if he seamlessly fits in well with this Memphis team, they're going to be really dangerous.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that chemistry is affected. Andy, Auburn also at home. Congrats to our boss, Zach Blackerby. The Tigers knock off USC on Sunday, 91-75. USC just kind of continues to woo. They are now 5-5. Auburn moves to 8-2. The losses are a neutral to Baylor, first game of the season. All right, fine. And a true road game at App State by just 5 points. Honestly, Andy, I can live with those losses.
Yeah.
I think it might be time to rank Auburn. I haven't done my top 25 yet, but I'm almost positive I will have them in there along with Memphis and probably Ole Miss now. Hey, what's up? So Aiden Holloway leads the way for Auburn, 15.6 assists, 2 rebounds, but 5 Tigers in total in double figures. Great win for Bruce Pearl at home. USC, man, they got to start getting some things figured out. We'll see what happens there with Andy Enfield's team. By the way, Andy, Louisville won on Sunday. Congrats to the Cards. Don't think it's going to mean much, though. Been a great show being together today. Enjoy your Monday, folks. We are a week away to the day from Christmas. Can't wait to celebrate that. Hope all your preparations go well. Thanks so much for joining us. We'd love to talk more college basketball with you. As Andy said earlier, come hop into the Discord. The link to that is in the show notes. You can subscribe to the show on audio and video platforms. We'd love it if you'd rate and review the show as well. Smash the like button if you're watching, and we'd love to hear your comments on all of this weekend's action. As always, apologies to the Loyer family. My goodness, Fletcher, way to go. Go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.